My father asked for $8.5 thousand for a business, but refused to explain. When I declined, he called me stingy and sabotaged our marriage in revenge. A simple request for $8,500 spiraled into an emotional war zone. It wasn't just about money. It was about a shocking betrayal that ultimately cost me my marriage and revealed the horrifying truth about the man I loved. My husband, James, and I have been married for 5 wonderful years. We have a beautiful son, and honestly, for a long time I thought we had it all figured out. James is incredibly hardworking, devoted to our family and his career, and I always admired that about him. We both earn decent salaries, but we had a clear, if sometimes unusual, way of managing our money. I was the one who handled the big household expenses: mortgage, electricity, water, internet, making sure all those bills were paid on time. James, on the other hand, covered everything for our son: school fees, clothes, toys, you name it. He also chipped in for our auto loan and, crucially, he was the primary financial support for his parents. See, James's parents are retired, and they don't have any savings. They have 2 daughters, but James is their eldest, and he's always felt this deep responsibility for them. They'd never been financially stable, and over the years, any money they did have went straight to medical bills or funding his sister's weddings. So James stepped up. He made sure they had money for daily expenses, groceries, doctor's visits, everything. His sisters, they did absolutely nothing. In fact, they pretty much used their parents as free, round-the-clock babysitters, dropping off their kids for hours on end without a single thought about contributing financially. It was James, always James, who looked after them, while his sisters just took. And I wanted to help too. I really did. Every weekend I'd visit James's parents, check in, see if they needed anything. I'd stock their fridge with fresh produce, making sure they never had to worry about food. My mother-in-law loves her garden, so I'd spend hours helping her maintain it, because I knew how much pride she took in it. I even took her to a spa every month for a day of pampering and a massage. She deserved it after all those years of working and raising a family. James and I truly believed we did the most, not just financially, but by making their daily lives easier and more pleasant. But despite all of that, all our efforts, it felt like James's parents had this undeniable favoritism towards his sisters. It was infuriating. They always seemed to prioritize their daughters, no matter how much we did. Our son, he was barely acknowledged. Yet, they'd happily use the money James gave them to buy expensive gifts for their other grandkids. It was like a punch to the gut, especially around Christmas. They'd splurge on lavish presents for their daughters' kids, but our son would get a single pair of socks. Just one pair. Both James and I knew it, we felt it, but we always kept quiet to avoid drama, to maintain some semblance of family harmony. But I won't lie, it stung. It really stung to see our hard work ignored, while his sisters, who put in the absolute minimum effort, were showered with favor. Then last year, something shifted with my father-in-law. He started making new friends, other retired guys in the neighborhood. And every time I saw him, he'd be buzzing with excitement, telling me all about the amazing things they were teaching him. He said they were showing him how to invest, even pushing him to start his own business. I genuinely thought, okay, this is good for him. I encouraged him, thinking a personal project would keep him busy, give him purpose, something to focus on in retirement. I had no idea I was about to walk into a nightmare. Not long after, my father-in-law came to James and me with a request that felt more like a demand. He declared he'd finally landed on a business concept and needed a significant amount of capital to get it off the ground. He made it absolutely clear he expected our full support. Naturally, I was curious. "What kind of business, Dad?" he asked. But instead of explaining, he just waved me off. He said he couldn't share the details, worried someone might steal his brilliant idea. Right away, that struck me as incredibly odd. If he was so confident, so sure this was a goldmine, why wouldn't he give us any hint? Even a general idea. And then came the bombshell. He expected us to hand over $8,000. James and I were utterly blindsided. $8,000. That wasn't a favor. That was an astronomical sum for us. James tried to explain gently, that we didn't just have that kind of cash lying around. But my father-in-law didn't even listen. He just cut James off, sneering, and called him stingy. Then he launched into this emotional, defensive plea. "Don't you trust me? I'm your father. Do you think I'd ask for this if I wasn't absolutely sure?" He even threw in, "Trust me. Give me the money. I promise I'll pay you back with interest." James, bless his heart, looked completely stunned, but he actually gave this slow, cautious nod, like he was genuinely considering it. Me. I just sat there, frozen in utter disbelief. The whole thing just reeked of suspicion. My father-in-law hadn't held a steady job in years, even before retirement. And now, suddenly, he had this brilliant business plan, but he wouldn't share any specifics. Plus, he was promising an almost unbelievable return on investment. Felt too perfect, too good to be true. I tried to explain calmly that our savings were our savings. We built them together. And honestly, with all of James's financial obligations, I was the one contributing the most to that cushion. So, if he wanted us to invest such a huge sum, we needed some kind of guarantee. I told him he didn't have to share his grand strategy if he wasn't comfortable, but if he refused, we would need paperwork. Proper documentation to ensure that money would be repaid. It was just basic common sense. The second those words left my mouth, both James and his father looked profoundly insulted. My father-in-law's face flushed crimson. He started yelling, absolutely furious that I would dare ask him to sign paperwork. An insult, he called it. He screamed that I should just trust him. And then the ultimate gut punch. James sided with him. My husband, my partner, said he had complete faith in his father. And because we were financially able to give him $8,000, it wasn't something we ought to be quarreling over. I was utterly shocked. Son, our finances might have been stable, but that didn't mean we could just throw away $8,000 without any security. I argued with James, my voice shaking. Our savings weren't his personal piggy bank to give away. That money was for our future, and more importantly, for our son's future. We both worked so hard to build it. He had no right to treat it like his own personal fund, to hand out without my agreement. I was trying to be logical, pragmatic, but James found my words extremely offensive. He actually yelled at me, accusing me of doubting his father, of implying his father was trying to steal from us. I tried to stay composed. I didn't say anything like that, James. I'm just being pragmatic. I pointed out that there was no guarantee this business would succeed, and we could lose all $8,000. I reminded them that his father had never repaid us for anything in the past, and now, out of nowhere, he was starting a business. If I was loaning anyone that kind of money, I'd need assurance. But they wouldn't listen. They kept pushing, "Trust us. We're family." They made me feel like I was the unreasonable one for wanting to proceed with caution. Then it got even worse. My father-in-law, seething, completely erupted. He roared that in his time, women weren't even consulted about these matters, and he couldn't understand why I was interfering. He made it crystal clear he thought this was a men's discussion, and that I had no place questioning him. And then, he turned to James and said something that filled me with absolute horror. He told James he needed to maintain control over his wife, to prevent me from being engaged in matters of this kind. As if I were some disobedient animal that needed to be reined in. It was in that precise moment that it clicked. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect. And it was blindingly obvious I was getting none. Don't get involved. He said it to me as if I needed my husband's permission to speak. I was not going to stand silent in the face of such indignity, especially when he was the one begging us for money. I locked eyes with him and told him exactly what was on my mind. "You are the one pleading for our money," I reminded him. "Yet you have the audacity to attack me just because I'm a woman." I made it abundantly clear. "You will not get 1 single cent of our money." I looked at James. "If you want to help your father, you'll have to come up with the money yourself. Our savings account is shared, and you do not have the authority to withdraw any funds without my consent." The second those words left my lips, my father-in-law went completely off the deep end. He began screaming, hurling accusation after accusation, as if I had personally offended him. James wasn't much happier. His face was strained, simmering with rage. But instead of escalating with me, he actually tried to soothe his father. He asked his father to give us some time, and promised he would speak with me. That seemed to calm my father-in-law down a bit, and eventually, he left our home. But after he was gone, James and I had one of the most violent arguments we've ever had. He accused me of being rude, cold, and mean, for refusing to help his father. He truly believed I'd shown him disrespect, embarrassed his dad with a blunt no. But I saw it completely differently. I told James, "Your father is trying to take our hard-earned money without any consideration for us. He refuses to give details, and he's insulting me because I didn't immediately agree. How am I supposed to trust someone who can't even give a basic description of his business?" I could see James was torn, but I felt utterly alone. He wasn't seeing things from my perspective. He was making me out to be the bad guy simply because I refused to be manipulated. And honestly, that hurt more than anything. I knew, with absolute certainty, that my father-in-law couldn't be trusted. And I was so relieved I'd listened to my gut. If it had been up to James alone, that $8,500 would already be gone. He was completely at the mercy of his parents, always complying with their every request, no matter how irrational. His father knew exactly how to exploit James's deep sense of responsibility. His guilt, his devotion. That's why he never once asked his daughters for money. He knew they wouldn't give him a dime. They weren't obligated, and they wouldn't be coerced. My husband, though, he was an easy target. My father-in-law knew James would step up every single time, no matter the cost to us. By the way, if you're still with me and this story has you hooked, please hit that subscribe button. More unbelievable stories like this are coming. The conflict between James and me escalated like never before. Our home became a war zone of intolerable stress, all thanks to his father's relentless pressure. James was bombarded daily with calls and texts, begging him for the money. And then it got worse. His mother and sisters joined in. Instead of acknowledging that $8,500 is a huge amount, and we had every right to think it through, they kept hammering James. "As the eldest son, it's your obligation," they'd say, "to fund your father's business, no matter your concerns." And if that wasn't bad enough, they started attacking me. They called me greedy, a gold digger, as if I was selfishly hoarding money when all I was trying to do was safeguard our family's future. They accused me of trying to destroy family unity, just by saying no to an unreasonable demand. But the most heartbreaking part was starting to work on James. I watched it happen slowly. The guilt, the pressure, the constant emotional manipulation. It was wearing him down. He was being brainwashed, slowly convincing himself they were right, and I was the unreasonable one. I felt like I was losing him to his family, even though I tried so hard to reason with him. They just kept pulling him further and further away from me. James actually started insisting that we should just give his father the money, to think of it as a one-time investment. He'd argue, "Whether we get it back or lose it, it doesn't matter. I just want this to be over. I want to make my father happy." But I utterly, completely disagreed. I told him again and again, I am not comfortable with that. We were not his family's personal cash cow. I was sick and tired of them always looking to us for money. It was never ending. They would take, and the moment we said no, we were branded the villains. At that point, I knew I couldn't just sit around, hoping James wouldn't make a reckless decision. I had to act. So, as a precautionary measure, I quietly withdrew my share of the money from our joint account. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I couldn't take the risk. I had contributed the most to that savings account. I had worked tirelessly to build that financial cushion. Not just for us, but for our child's future, for emergencies, for stability. I wasn't going to let all of that be drained away because his family saw us as their personal ATM. If I'd left that money there, I knew exactly what would happen. James, desperate for his father's and sister's approval, was in a dangerous place. They would have pressured him, worn him down, bit by bit, until he eventually caved. And once he gave them money, it wouldn't stop there. They would keep coming back, demanding more, finding new excuses, pulling him deeper and deeper into their financial black hole. There was a very real possibility that in my absence, James would give them every last dollar. I couldn't let that happen. At least now I had control over my share. He knew the money I worked for was secure. If James still wanted to give his father money, that would be his responsibility. He'd have to figure out how to do it without compromising the financial stability I had worked so hard to establish. Just as I feared, James actually tried to withdraw the $8,500 from our account without my knowledge. And when he discovered I'd already taken my share, he was absolutely furious. He screamed that his family had been right about me all along. He insisted that as the head of the family, he had the authority to decide how our money was spent, and I had no right to act against him. The arguments between us became more intense, more brutal with each passing day. Then, in what he called an act of retaliation, James decided to leave. He packed his bags and walked out, actually telling me he needed to teach me a lesson about family ethics. It was like a physical slap to the face. This was the man I had built a life with, the man I loved, supported, and stood by for years, the man for whom I had made countless sacrifices. But when it came down to choosing between his parents and his wife, the wife who had done more for them than his own sisters ever would, he chose his parents. I was devastated, truly, utterly broken. For years, I had treated his family as my own, giving my financial, emotional, and physical all. And now, because I refused to hand over a substantial sum of money that I might never see again, I was being punished. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Giving them $8,500 simply wasn't right. No matter how much James and his family pressured me, I knew deep down I wasn't in the wrong. I was taking a stand for myself, and for the financial well-being of our child. So, if James wanted to break up our family over this, if he truly believed walking away from his wife and son was the right thing to do, then I wouldn't stand in his way. That was his decision to make. But I refused to be manipulated or guilt-tripped any longer. If standing my ground meant losing him, then so be it. At the end of the day, I deserved a partner who appreciated me as much as I appreciated them. 3 months passed. James was still living with his parents, refusing to come home. He seemed to have completely settled in with them, and he made no attempts to reconcile with me. We stopped communicating altogether, at least about us. Our marriage, our feelings. It was all silence. He still saw our son every other day, which I appreciated. He hadn't abandoned his role as a father, thank God. But the anger he felt that day, when I refused him the money, it hadn't dissipated. He was still harboring that resentment, still refusing to accept that I was completely within my rights to take a stand. Then yesterday, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was James. I was shocked. We hadn't spoken in weeks. My first thought was our son. It was his day with James, so my heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed the phone, bracing for the worst. But what he said next completely blindsided me. He sounded incredibly upset. But for the first time in months, his anger wasn't directed at me. He confessed he'd just found out the real reason his father had been so desperate for $8,500. It wasn't for a business venture at all. In fact, there was no business. His sisters, he discovered, had been pressuring his father to buy them a family vacation home. Their twisted logic. It would be a wise investment for their kids, a place for lasting family memories. But neither of them, not one, was willing to contribute a single dollar. They didn't want to pay for it themselves. So they convinced their father it was his obligation to make it happen. Instead of saying no, My father-in-law had simply tried to get the money from us. James admitted that if we'd given his father the money, it wouldn't have been the end. The $8,500 wouldn't have been the final amount. It would have been just the beginning. His father would have kept coming up with excuses, hiding behind his phony business concept, until enough money was amassed to cover that damn vacation home. When I heard this, a torrent of emotions washed over me. Anger, frustration, but mostly, this immense wave of validation. Everything I had suspected, every gut feeling, every single one of my instincts. It was all true. I wasn't crazy. Far from being selfish, I was the only one who saw the manipulation for what it truly was, right from the very beginning. James saw it now too. His voice on the phone was genuinely distressed, tense. And for the first time in months, he actually sounded regretful. He apologized to me. I hadn't anticipated that, not after everything we'd been through. This time there was no anger, no defensiveness. Only deep regret. He confessed that before he uncovered the truth, he had actually already lent his father some money. I could hear the sheer frustration in his voice as he described how he had believed his father's story, how he thought he was doing the right thing by supporting a legitimate business venture. He'd been completely deceived. After he confronted his father, James was utterly shaken. He felt lied to, betrayed, humiliated, and disgusted by the manipulation. He admitted I had been correct all along, that I had seen the warning signs, that I had safeguarded our money, and that he should have listened to my advice from the very start. His voice was hesitant, almost uncertain, as if he knew the immense damage that had been done, but still clung to a sliver of hope that everything could return to how it was. He told me that once he truly understood the extent of his family's manipulation, he couldn't bear to live with them anymore. The betrayal, the lies, and the fact that his own father had taken advantage of him. It had shattered something inside him. He confessed he felt embarrassed for trusting them blindly, for letting them persuade him to turn against me. He said it had become impossible to stay under the same roof with the people who had lied to him, who had coerced him into breaking up his marriage. He no longer wanted to be in their company. He longed to come home. But for me it wasn't that simple. I took a deep, shaky breath, letting his words sink in. Just a few months ago, I would have given anything to hear him say this. To hear him finally acknowledge what he'd done, to see the truth. But now that the moment was here, I didn't feel the relief I'd expected. Instead, I felt a sharp ache of anger, hurt, and profound disbelief. I made sure he knew exactly how I felt. When you walked out of our home to stand by your parents, I told him, "You broke my trust." It wasn't just that he left. It was everything that came with it. The way he'd disregarded my concerns. The way he'd allowed his family to repeatedly insult me. He had painted me as the villain in our own story, simply because I refused to be taken advantage of. It made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. He'd made it seem as though my opinions didn't matter, as though my financial contributions and sacrifices meant nothing. And now, after months of choosing them over me, after watching me suffer through the humiliation of being called a gold digger and a family breaker, he suddenly wanted to come back. Didn't feel right. I made it clear. I wasn't prepared to just forgive and forget. "You made your decision when you decided to leave," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my heart. "Now it's my turn to make mine." Before I could even consider letting him back into my life, I needed time. Time to process. Time to heal. Time to figure out if this marriage was even salvageable. After months of grueling therapy and relentless, painful discussions with James, I finally reached a conclusion. One that fills me with both sorrow and a fierce sense of resolve. Our marriage cannot be salvaged. When James first suggested coming back, there was a tiny, desperate part of me that still hoped we could fix things. Despite the searing pain of his choices, choosing his parents over me, allowing them to insult me, leaving our home just to prove a point, I held on to that hope. So for 3 long months we tried. We went to marriage counseling. Session after session, I sat across from him, laying my heart bare, doing everything I could to make him understand the depth of his betrayal. I told him how his doubts, his blind loyalty, his utter lack of consideration for my feelings had completely shattered my trust. I described how degrading it felt to be branded a gold digger by his family, especially when I was the one shouldering the majority of our financial load. I told him for us to move forward, things had to change. We needed to cut off his family financially. We couldn't be their safety net anymore. We couldn't keep rescuing them every time they mismanaged their lives. We were done making sacrifices for a family that only saw us as a source of income. We had to establish clear boundaries. That meant going low contact, not completely severing ties, but creating a much-needed distance from James's manipulative family. But he refused, absolutely refused. Even after everything his family did, the lies, the manipulation, the financial abuse, he still insisted he couldn't abandon them. He maintained it was his responsibility, as the oldest son, to look after them, no matter what. Even though they took advantage of him. Even though they disrespected me. Even though they nearly tore our marriage apart. That was it. That was my limit. In that moment I realized nothing would ever change. Even if I forgave him then and there, this cycle would just repeat itself. James would continue to give, and I would forever be at the bottom of his priority list. His family. They never once apologized for all the cruel things they said to me. I will not live like this anymore. I will not stay in a marriage where my voice is drowned out by the demands of his family. I will not be in a marriage where I'm expected to sacrifice my financial security for people who contribute absolutely nothing. I will not be in a marriage where I'm constantly fighting to be appreciated, respected, and heard. So I've made my decision. I am choosing to prioritize myself. I've spoken with my lawyer and I will be filing for divorce. James made his decision when he chose his family over me. Now it's my turn. I will not remain in a relationship where I am always going to be second best. I deserve so much more than this. This time I am putting myself first. What would you have done in my position? Have you ever had to choose between your spouse and their manipulative family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear what you think.